Well, welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. And if you're looking for a Marxist discussion of Roe versus Wade, you've come to the right place. My name is Gene Rule, and I am a member of the program committee of the Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, or ICSSmarx.org. And I was pretty outraged when I heard that the Supreme Court plans to overturn Roe versus Wade. And I knew that as a Marxist organization, we needed to deal with it. So I called my friend Dick Becker of the Answer Coalition, who recommended that we invite Rosa Astra, a young militant journalist, community organizer, and activist with the Answer Coalition based here in Oakland to speak on the issue. But before I turn it over to her, I need to say a few things about our institute and our procedures. Obviously, we are on Zoom now, and this program will be recorded and placed on our website. The Marxist Library is located on Telegraph Avenue, about a mile south of the UC Berkeley campus. The difference is that we didn't invent the atomic bomb, and we don't illegally store thousands of Indian bodies collected during the genocide for, quote, study. And also, we do Marxism right. ICSS was formed nearly 20 years ago to further the library's goals of preserving our written heritage and supporting emerging struggles for gender and racial equality and for socialism. The members of ICSS are active in different aspects of people's struggles in the Bay Area and globally. Some of us are affiliated with specific parties and tendencies, others are not. We do not, we respect one another, but we do not necessarily agree on all issues. Accordingly, the opinions expressed in our programs are those of the participants and do not represent any kind of group consensus on the issues discussed. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And we are all also in solidarity with our sister organization in Boston, the Center for Marxist Education. And I think we probably have some members from there. One further issue needs to be addressed, I think, and especially today, which is not only Father's Day, but also Juneteenth. And it's the anniversary coming up of the Stonewall Uprising. And we are seeing millions of people out marching for pride and for the planet. Now, some comrades may think that the whole debate over Roe versus Wade is not something that real Marxists should worry about, especially if the discussion might drift off into queer and trans people. Marxists, some may think, have more important concerns such as war, political economy, and crisis theory, and so forth. But such a view ignores what Lenin called one of the fundamental works of modern socialism, origins of the family, private property, and the state, which Engels compiled from Marx's anthropological notebooks. And I'd like to take a minute just to look over some of what Engels says in there. Again, this is hardcore Marxism. He says that according to the materialistic conception, the determining factor in history is, in the final instance, the production and reproduction of the immediate essentials of life. This, again, is of a twofold character. On the one hand, the production of the means of existence, of articles of food and clothing, dwellings, and the tools necessary for that production. On the other side, the production of human beings themselves, the propagation of the species, the social organization under which the people of a particular historical epoch and a particular country is determined by both kinds of production, by the stage of development of labor on the one hand and of the family on the other. And clearly, Engels is opening the way here for a critical analysis of the modern family, noting, for example, that within the family, the husband is the bourgeois and the wife the proletariat. And perhaps he would go further if he were alive today and see the Supreme Court's ruling as attempting to control the conditions of labor for the wife/worker. More than this, Engels allowed himself some conjectures about the future of the family, noting that what we can now conjecture about the way in which sexual relations will be ordered after the impending overthrow of capitalist production is mainly of a negative character, limited for the most part to what will disappear. But what will there be that is new? That will be answered when a new generation has grown up, a generation of people who have never known class, racial, or gender oppression, either as oppressor or oppressed. When these people are in the world, they will care precious little what anybody today thinks they ought to do. They will make their own practice and their corresponding public opinion about the practice of each individual, and that will be the end of it. So that this new generation is being born, and many are already with us. And as Marxists and communists, we need to listen to what they have to say. And that concludes my remarks. I apologize for taking it over, and I will turn it over to our speaker, Rosa Astra. And Rosa grew up in rural Virginia, and I believe graduated from Louisville University. She's involved in a number of working class struggles before settling in Oakland and joining the Answer Coalition. And she will speak, as we said, for about 45 or 50 minutes, and after which we will turn to discussion. So Rosa, it's over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Eugene, for that great introduction and for that context from the origin of private property, the family, and the state, which I think is a really crucial fundamental work of Marxist theory and is important for all of us to really study and understand when we're approaching these issues of what are fundamentally, I think the term that we would use for them today is social reproduction, which is part of the structure of the modern capitalist system and the way that gender oppression, the way that the oppression of women and LGBTQ people plays into the fundamental structure of capitalism, which is the oppression of the working class by the bourgeoisie and the exploitation of the labor of the workers for the profits of the capitalists. But I'm giving this talk at the Marxist Library, so I think everyone here is probably already on the same page about that. So I'm here to talk about the struggle for abortion rights, which goes, I think, beyond just Roe versus Wade, just this one Supreme Court decision, to the whole history of how abortion rights, how any sort of reproductive justice rights and any rights for women have been won through the struggle, and how that points the way to the future of that struggle and how we can ultimately win real liberation, which I think goes far beyond simply the right to abortion, and the right to make our own decisions about our own bodies and our own reproductive healthcare needs, but really to the full equality of people to participate and bring their unique talents to our society. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the state of things right now with the leaked Supreme Court decision. The final ruling on that, of course, could come out as early as Tuesday, and the situation right now is that this decision would overturn Roe v. Wade. That 13 states in the U.S. would immediately ban abortion in all or most circumstances, due to trigger bills that they've already passed that would go into effect as soon as Roe v. Wade is overturned. So the situation that we find ourselves in today is a dire one, and one that requires immediate organization in response. I also want to talk a little bit about the history of the struggle for abortion rights. And in doing so, we can get into really the particularities of how abortion rights are a working class issue, how women's rights is a working class issue, and also how these rights, as we have them in our capitalist society today, and see as we see ourselves winning them in a more full and complete form in the future, are won through the struggle, not through some sort of gift of the bourgeois institutions, not through the not through some, benefactors of the capitalist class giving us these rights, but that they are things that we have won. I'm also going to talk a little bit about, sorry, I see that there's a comment that someone can barely hear. Are are folks able to actually hear?
I think you're actually coming across okay. That's probably on the user side. You're coming
Okay.
across. Yeah.
All right, thanks. So I also want to talk about why abortion and reproductive justice issues, and also women's and LGBTQ rights in general, are the issues that they are under US capitalism. Why are these the wedge issues that the reactionary forces, that the right wing are focusing on in order to advance their attacks on the working class? I want to talk a little bit about the Democratic Party, about what the Democratic Party has done and what they have not done, and why there is no faction of the capitalist ruling class that we can count on to lead the struggle for abortion rights and for reproductive justice. Um, I want to talk about why this is a struggle that has to be led by socialists. I want to talk a little bit about how we're not just fighting against the attacks on women, on LGBTQ people, on abortion rights, on reproductive rights in general. We're fighting for something. We're fighting for true reproductive justice and true women's liberation under a socialist system. And how it's so important that we bring that vision to the struggle as we're fighting to defend the basic gains that the struggle has won us so far. So that's the general outline of what we'll be covering today. And I'm going to come back to this because I think that, bringing this sort of structure to my remarks and sort of, having this roadmap in front of us will help, keep us on path as we go through this conversation. And I also want to encourage, if there's any just like clarifying questions or anything as we get through the talk, feel free to put them in the chat. I may not necessarily be able to get to them immediately. I know there's also going to be some time for Q&A and more in-depth discussion at the end, but I just want to make sure that I'm not losing anyone as we go through this. So, what is the current situation of the struggle? As I mentioned a moment ago, the Supreme Court has leaked a draft ruling on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This ruling would fundamentally overturn Roe versus Wade. It would fundamentally allow states to ban abortion in all or most circumstances as they see fit in their state legislatures. And that's not just a hypothetical. There are currently 13 states that would immediately ban abortion in this circumstance, and many other states that have Republican-controlled legislatures, especially, are currently in the process of ramming through abortion restrictions and outright abortion bans, so that when they expect that this ruling will come out, that they will have in place the legislation to also immediately ban abortion. So this is something that is going to affect tens of millions of women immediately as soon as this decision is released. And this decision could come out as early as Tuesday. Some of you may also be closely following the developments from the Supreme Court. We have this current Supreme Court is releasing actually sort of an unprecedented number of decisions. They're just cranking them out. And many of these decisions that have been released over the past couple of weeks have been very reactionary, which is not a surprise given the composition of the Supreme Court and I think the current balance of forces in the class struggle, the current sort of demobilization after the massive mobilizations of 2020. Which really points to the need for us to be in the streets and fighting back. But we don't know when this decision will come out. We also don't know for a fact that it will be the same decision that was leaked as a draft. There could be changes. The amount of just public outrage that has happened around the leaked draft decision could have actually forced the Supreme Court to redo some parts of the decision. It may not be as bad as the leaked draft, or it could be as bad as the leaked draft. We don't know for sure. It's unlikely, though, that it will be changed to the extent of not actually fundamentally overturning or seriously undermining Roe v. Wade. And again, this decision could come out Tuesday. It could come out Wednesday. It could be in another couple of weeks. We have to stay alert. We won't know until basically the day that it's coming out that it is. For those of you who are in the Bay Area, the day that that decision is released, we are meeting at Powell and Market at 5 p.m. for a mass mobilization and a rally to start organizing to fight back against this reactionary decision. So I highly encourage all of you to be there at Powell and Market on the day that the decision is actually released. So there's a little bit more to the situation than just Roe v. Wade and this looming decision from the Supreme Court that would overturn it as well. Just a few weeks ago, there was a vote actually in Congress on the Women's Health Protection Act. And are folks familiar with the Women's Health Protection Act? Let me go into it. Okay, so the WHPA is a bill that would legalize abortion nationally. It would basically codify the protections of Roe v. Wade into law so that it's no longer on the Supreme Court, these unelected, completely devoted lifelong servants of the capitalist class who constitute the Supreme Court to decide whether abortion is legal or not. It would actually make it a law so that at least rolling back that gain would require passing another law to repeal it. It would take it out of the hands of the Supreme Court and put it into the hands of the legislature, which is elected at least. Even if this is a bourgeois system where these elections don't necessarily really reflect the interests of the working class, still, the Congress has the ability to legalize abortion. Congress has the ability to codify any of the decisions that have been made by the Supreme Court that protect various rights of various aspects of our class, of which there are so many. It's really shocking, actually, when you think about it, how much of the victories of our movements over the years, over the decades, that have been ultimately established via a Supreme Court ruling in response to mass mobilizations in the streets. And then that Supreme Court ruling has never even actually been codified into law. And so it's only this interpretation that is the established precedent until some new precedent comes along to overturn it, that our legal rights are hinged upon. And so the situation is very unstable, and it is very harmful to our class. It's very beneficial to the Democrats and to the capitalist class, because it means that they can always fundraise. They can always send out those emails and those text blasts, asking people to send them donations for their election campaigns in order to defend the right to abortion, for example. But okay, the Democrats have a majority in both houses of Congress. They have the presidency. Are they actually taking steps to defend the right to abortion? Well, the answer is no. And not even just that in the abstract they're not doing anything, but they had the opportunity to pass the Women's Health Protection Act. It went to a vote a few weeks ago. Actually, the Republicans called their bluff on it. The Republicans did not even attempt to filibuster the WHPA. They let it go to a vote, and it failed because some Democrats voted against it. The Democratic Party, which fundraises on the platform, which presents itself to the people on the platform that they are the saviors of women, that they are the torchbearers of a movement that would bring us our liberation, that would defend our rights, that would defend the right to abortion and all of the other things that we've won in the struggle, voted against a bill that would legalize abortion and take it out of the hands of the Supreme Court. They could have completely taken the wind out of the sails of the Supreme Court decision and made it irrelevant, whether the Supreme Court decided to overturn Roe or not. And they voted not to do that. Not just that, but Nancy Pelosi, who is the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, has actually insisted that abortion rights should not be a litmus test for Democratic candidates. She has been in Texas supporting the campaign of Henry Cuellar, who is opposed to abortion rights. So the Democratic leadership is actually campaigning for politicians who are anti-abortion against more progressive challengers, also Democrats, who at least nominally support abortion rights. What this really shows is that not only are our rights to abortion hanging in the balance with this decision from the Supreme Court that threatens to overturn Roe v. Wade, but also that the Democratic Party has done little to nothing or even actively counterproductive things to actually defend this right. So, okay, that's the current situation right now. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of the struggle for abortion rights, because if you ask the Democrats, if you ask the bourgeois institutions, the history is basically that people sent Democrats money, people voted for Democrats, the Democrats got into office, and then good things came from there, and we can all go home and trust our Democratic representatives to do what's best, and we don't need to worry about it. Politics is out of our hands. We can trust that our benefactor overlords will have our best interests at heart. But that's completely a lie, of course. The history of the struggle for abortion rights really is a history of struggle. And it has been a history of not just it has been a history not just of women, not just of especially the richest layers of women fighting for the right to abortion, but it has really been a working class struggle, for abortion rights. Abortion was actually, this is an interesting piece of context that I think a lot of people in this country don't actually know. Abortion was widely practiced in the US before the 1880s. It was just not illegal. And abortions were done sort of in secret. It was sort of a whisper network among women to find doctors or to find doctors or practitioners who could do abortions, but they were actually available, at least to people who could afford them. And that was up until the 1880s, when the women's suffrage movement and the very early sort of feminist movement started to make some serious gains. And there was a wave of sort of moral panic backlash against that. There were white supremacist eugenicist forces talking about supposed declining white birth rates in the North, and who were putting forward anti-abortion and anti-contraceptive policies in order to combat that. They would use terms at the time like talking about that, white women were committing quote unquote race suicide, which I mean is, well, it's horrific. It's hard to put into words. The level to which this is just a deeply white supremacist and eugenicist idea. But also, I think those who are paying attention to the way that the far right is talking about abortion rights, and also immigration and many other things today, can hear echoes in this language of the way that the far right is talking today. So there is this continuous thread through history of our struggle for our rights, but also of this right-wing backlash against that struggle. One of the major early fighters for abortion rights was, of course, Margaret Sanger, who actually started out as a socialist. She started out as an ally of the trade union movement, and was actually a member of the Socialist Party for some time. And she was in the course of her work, she actually split from the socialist movement and adopted, instead of a sort of egalitarian and a sort of egalitarian and anti-racist and so on orientation towards the struggle for abortion rights, she started to actually attach to these white supremacist and eugenicist ideas, but from the other direction now, proposing forced sterilization for undesirable populations, and really wedding her early faction of the movement to these reactionary ideas. And I think that this really shows the necessity of wedding our struggle for abortion rights, wedding our struggle for women's liberation with the struggle for socialism, because that's the only force that can unite these struggles, that can prevent this this sort of co-optation into reactionary way of thinking of the struggles that our movement is putting forward. So, okay, so fast forward to the sort of like mid 20th century. before Roe was actually passed, there's the sort of conception that the legalization of abortion allowed for people to start having abortions, but that's not actually true either. Before Roe was passed, there were over 1 million women having secret abortions every year. There were more than 1 million people every year would have abortions. And of course, at the time, rich women had access to safe abortions. They could find a doctor who would do it under the table, and do it in a safe, medical context. But working class women were forced to resort to more drastic measures, often unsafe measures. And what happened was that the ban on abortion did not actually stop abortions from happening. It made them less safe, and it especially made them less safe for working class women. In the 60s, 200 people died every year from complications from unsafe abortion procedures. And there were thousands and thousands of people who were injured from these procedures. And that's the mortality rate overall. The mortality rate of Black and Latina women was 12 times higher than that of white women. The mortality rate of poor women was dramatically higher than the mortality rate for the rich women who were part of the bourgeoisie, who could afford to access safe abortions even while they were illegal. So the brunt of these policies to ban abortion, again, they don't stop abortions from happening. What they do is they make abortions less safe. And who do they make abortions less safe for? It's for working class women, for poor women, for women of oppressed nationalities. And that's why it's really important that we understand that the attacks on abortion rights are really an attack on the working class as a whole. It's really important for us to understand the right to abortion was won through a militant struggle. Feminists and workers who supported the struggle for abortion rights organized speakouts and pickets. There were referral networks for underground abortion services. There were feminist self-help groups that organized ways of doing abortion safely without needing a doctor. So there were many techniques that were developed for this that were done in an underground way. And the fact of the matter is that abortion does not have to be a dangerous medical procedure, and modern medical abortions are very safe. But actually, some of these underground self-help networks were able to provide abortions in a way that was as safe as modern medical abortions. The problem is that they were relentlessly attacked by the forces of the capitalist state. They were relentlessly attacked by the police, and their operations were criminalized. They were arrested in order to stop these safe but illegal underground abortions that were accessible to working class women from going forward. The struggle connected the fight for abortion with demands for equal pay, for free childcare, for community control of medical institutions. The organizers in all of these movements really learned from the struggles and the victories of the civil rights movement, which had happened in the preceding decade. They learned from the high point of labor militancy in the 1930s and the radicalism that won so many things for our class in that period. And it was through learning from the history of all of the struggles for liberation, not just women's liberation as an isolated thing, not just the struggle for abortion rights as an isolated thing, but from learning from the way that our class fights for our rights, that the struggle was able to consolidate, advance, and move forward. I want to tell a little story about one of these underground abortion clinics, which was called Jane in Chicago. In the early 1960s, it was founded by Heather Booth. After she had helped a friend's sister obtain an abortion, basically she was able to find a doctor who was willing to perform the procedure. And the word of mouth spread, and soon there were just people calling her, just women calling her, asking, how can I access an abortion? I need I need this medical procedure. And this is, of course, when it was illegal in Illinois. And so she realized that there needed to be a system in place. There needed to be an organization to respond to this need. And through the Chicago Women's Liberation Union, she helped to form this organization called JANE. And initially, Jane partnered with licensed medical practitioners, but as the clientele, grew and grew, as more and more people were seeking these services, the women members actually decided to learn how to start performing abortions themselves. There was basically a mafia doctor who had been performing abortions, who taught them how to do the procedure safely in the context of just an apartment, not necessarily needing a medical operating theater in order to do it safely. The organization grew to dozens of women who all both understood the practicalities of how to organize this work, how to carry out these procedures in a safe way, but also understanding the political need, the importance of providing access to safe abortion to especially poor and nationally oppressed women, to working class women who otherwise would not have had access to it. At the peak of their organization, this group performed about 40 abortions per week, which is really significant given that they were operating underground illegally. They had very little access to resources. They provided over 11,000 first and second trimester abortions, and they had a safety record rivaling today's legal practice. They typically charged $100 for the procedure, and no one was turned away for lack of funds. And this was at a time when bourgeois women were able to access underground, technically illegal abortion services, but it was typically much more expensive than that, $500, $1,000, in order to access those services. And so this was a crucial lifeline for working class people who needed abortions in particular. After 7 years of successfully building the underground network, Jane was actually discovered by the forces of the capitalist state on May 3rd of 1972. The police tracked the group to an apartment in Chicago's South Shore neighborhood. Everyone who was there, all of the women who were in the apartment were taken into custody, including family members who were waiting for an abortion to be completed. And they were charged with 11 counts of, get this, the criminal charge, abortion and conspiracy to commit abortion. These people became known as the Abortion Seven, and their case was a pivotal moment in the struggle against this repression against abortion rights and the fight for abortion rights. There were rallies and support all across the country. Finally, their cases were dropped in 1973 when the Roe v. Wade decision came out and actually legalized abortion. So that's just to give you one picture of the way that through organizing, that women of our class were able to fight back against these abortion restrictions, even in the pre-Roe era. And this organization, taken it whole, I mean, not just Jane, but all of the groups like this across the country, all of the groups of women of our class in motion fighting against the repression, was what ultimately forced the Supreme Court to issue the Roe v. Wade ruling. And of course, the struggle has actually continued even after Roe. There's been the Hyde Amendment, which was passed by Congress 2 years after Roe v. Wade. So, Congress can't pass a law to legalize abortion, but they can sure pass a law to restrict it. The Hyde Amendment says that Medicare cannot pay for abortion services. Federally funded healthcare cannot pay for abortion services. So what does this mean? This takes us back to the situation where in order to access an abortion, you have to be able to afford it. Even in the situation where abortion is legal today, while we're on this precipice of Roe v. Wade being overturned, it's legal only for people who are able to afford it. And the Hyde Amendment is an amendment to the budget. So it's important to say that it's not just that the Hyde Amendment was passed once, it has to be repassed every year. And every year, Congress votes on this amendment to the budget to prevent the federal budget from being used to fund abortion services. So the right-wing attack, and I have to include the Democrats in this, the right-wing attack of the ruling capitalist class, the Republicans and Democrats alike, on abortion rights has never ceased. Janet said, I said Medicare, you think I meant Medicaid. You're right. Thank you. I misspoke. Thank you for the correction. So the fight back has also had to continue. There have been the right-wing protests outside of abortion clinics, and we have had to organize and fight back against those. The clinic escort collectives, in many cases, literally labor groups have organized to fight back against these. The abortion restrictions that have passed in many states, chipping away at the rights that were provided by the Roe v. Wade decision, which the Supreme Court has allowed to stand in many cases, to the point where in many states, even before the overturn of Roe v. Wade, there's actually only one abortion clinic that operates, which is in no way able to meet the needs of the people who live in that state, and requires people to travel long distances in order to access abortion services. And so really the attacks on abortion rights have never ceased, and the fight back against these attacks has also never ceased and remains crucial. And as Roe v. Wade is as the Supreme Court is threatening to overturn Roe v. Wade, it's really even more crucial, even more crucial than ever. So, okay, why are abortion and reproductive justice and women's and LGBTQ rights, why are all of these things the issues that they are under our capitalist system? I think this is a really important point to get into, because the right wing doesn't have to choose these avenues of attacking the working class. There are many options for the right wing to attack our class, and in other political contexts, sometimes they take different ones. But here in the US, in the conditions that we have to deal with, these are the strategies that the right wing has taken. And I think that it's important to really get into why that is the case. And so I'm going to lay out a little bit about sort of the structure of our class first, and get into that. And let's see, how am I doing on time? I think, all right, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. We're about a little bit over halfway through. So, all right. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Women are really the backbone of working class communities. This has always been true. Women are the ones who do the social reproduction, the childcare, making the food, cleaning the homes, and at the same time, often working and bringing home paychecks. In our capitalist society today, in 2022, women are not only expected to do all of these social reproduction tasks, but actually are going to college at higher rates, attaining higher levels of education than men, and are more likely to be working multiple jobs. And so this is this is just part of the structure of our class. We have to understand that, you know, maybe there's like a caricature of the working class as, you know, some like burly, muscular white man swinging a giant hammer in a steel plant somewhere. And yes, that is what one part of our class looks like, but our class contains so much more than just that caricature. And our class faces so much needless suffering in our system due to a lack of healthcare in general. Abortion is healthcare, and that is one type of healthcare that we suffer from the lack of, but it goes so far beyond that. This is often talked about as a sort of individual problem, you know, oh, well, it's your fault that you didn't buy health insurance, or you didn't research all the different hospitals or doctors that you could go to. You know, it's your fault that you don't have the money to go to the doctor ahead of time for preventative care, and so, you know, you haven't done all the things that you need to, or, you know, that you were supposed to. And our system is so good at scolding people and making it an individualized problem for why they have the issues in their life that they do. But when tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people are suffering from lack of adequate access to healthcare, that is not an individual problem. That is a systemic problem. A systemic problem. It is a problem of the system that we live in. And what is that system? It is, of course, capitalism. So liberal reproductive rights groups often focus on upper and middle class white women, and that's who their donors are, right? But that's not actually who is going to suffer the most if abortion is banned. Our class is the real target. Working class and nationally oppressed people are the real target of these attacks. There's so many examples that I can get to. I can't possibly talk about every aspect of this, but let's talk about HPV as one example of that. So HPV is, of course, the virus that causes cervical cancer, right? And is basically preventable. We have vaccines for it. We have treatments for it. You can prevent cervical cancer if you have adequate access to healthcare, and you catch it early, and you take the appropriate steps. And so this is a preventable disease, right, that has a very high prevalence among the working class. It is fundamentally a working class disease due to the way that healthcare is structured in our capitalist society. And it's not just that it has an especially high prevalence among our class as a whole, it has an even higher prevalence among Latina women due to the specific barriers that Latina women face in accessing healthcare in our capitalist society. All right, so, you know, the it also just needs to be said that, you know, the Texas politicians and the politicians in many states who are talking about how, you know, they are quote unquote pro-life in banning abortion are failing to provide this healthcare. You know, Texas has a horrible healthcare system, one of the worst in terms of health outcomes in the country. They have some of the worst funding for schools in the country. I mean, we can all remember a couple of years ago that their power grid collapsed due to the privatization of the infrastructure. There's no infant formula on the store shelves. They have ICE internment camps all across their border, and this vicious fascistic enforcement of the border against migrants, locking up children, and this is what they want to tell us is pro-life. This is not. I mean, we all in this room understand, I think, you know, the hypocrisy of the idea of anti-abortion being pro-life, but it just needs to be said. It needs to be laid out. We're now facing a public health crisis with the pandemic and with so many other things. We're facing a climate crisis. We're facing spiraling inflation, economic collapse, and there's supposedly no money for all of these social needs. But there's $43 billion for a war in Ukraine, right? Every time that the military budget comes up for a vote, the idea that there's no money is nowhere to be seen. But when we need healthcare, when we need education, when we need housing, the money is nowhere to be found. And okay, so what's going on here? I mean, obviously, the military budget are a subsidy for the military industrial contractors, right? And those constitute a huge section of the ruling capitalist class. And so this is just part of the mechanism of how the specific system of capitalist dictatorship that we have in the US functions. But okay, so how is this connected? The politicians are ignoring the real issues that working class people are facing, or maybe we could say they're not even ignoring it. They just don't care. They're glad about it, and they're instead focusing their messaging on attacking women, right? On attacking the right to abortion, on attacking reproductive rights in general, on attacking trans people and LGBTQ people in general, on attacking immigrants. Here in Oakland, they're shutting down public schools so that they can turn them into charters and privatize them. They're privatizing basic infrastructure, like the A's Stadium project here in Oakland, where the city is trying to turn this industrial port infrastructure that's actually publicly owned into a privately owned for-profit luxury condo and stadium development. These are the priorities of the capitalist class, and it's important to understand really where this comes from. The reversal of Roe v. Wade, and really all of these issues that I've just been talking about, are the latest step in a 50-year long, really it goes even a little bit further than that, right-wing strategy to push back on the gains that were won in the civil rights movement era in the 50s, the 60s, and also the gains that were won by the labor militancy of the period preceding that in the 30s. And their strategy for this is fusing Christian religious conservatism and economic conservatism, right? So they take these two aspects together, one of which benefits the finance capitalists and the other of which delivers a base, a voting base, people from the right-wing evangelical churches who can be brought into supporting this agenda that's frankly contrary to their own interests, in the interests of the Wall Street finance capitalists, by coupling these two issues together. And as our comrade Karina Garcia described this so eloquently, what we see is this unholy matrimony of the evangelical right wing and the forces of finance capital. This is fundamentally the reason that in the US, we see the right wing focusing on these attacks on women, on abortion rights, on all of these other issues. It's because in order to put together a governing coalition that ensures the dictatorship of the capitalist class, of especially finance capital, under the situations of our sort of liberal, quote unquote, democracy, that in order to put together a governing coalition, this is the strategy that they have taken, and it's working for them. I regret to inform you, and this is why it's so important that that we be organizing and fighting back. This is also why the Democratic Party and any other faction of the capitalist ruling class cannot, will not, under any circumstances, lead the struggle for abortion rights. They cannot be trusted to do it. We cannot hand our own class organization, our own interests over to the Democrats to move them forward, despite all of their strongly worded fundraising emails that, after this next upcoming most important election of our lives, they'll finally start to do something. This fight has to be taken up by the socialists. And I spoke about how throughout history we see that our rights have been won in the struggle, and that's one reason why. But another reason why is that the liberal wing of the feminist movement is really giving up without a fight. So many forces within the liberal wing of the feminist movement, within liberal NGOs, are painting this dismal picture of a post-Roe world. They're talking about a society where we've already lost, we've already failed to defend even the status quo, much less make any advances, and how we can sort of eke out a system where maybe California becomes an abortion sanctuary state, and they start talking about how they can fly people out from other states to here to California, the state with the most expensive housing, the most expensive travel costs in the country. Somehow this is going to be accessible to working class people in Texas who need an abortion. It's well, you can see how absurd this is. But it's important to understand what really the shape of this is, what really the shape of this sort of surrender that that the liberal wing of the feminists have given. Because, okay, the Democrats had majorities in both houses and the presidency, not just today. Today is not the only day that they've had an opportunity to pass a law legalizing abortion. They've had it under the Carter administration, under the Clinton administration, under the Obama administration. Never passed a bill legalizing abortion. And I could take that further to say they've never passed a bill protecting any of the rights that they supposedly stand for. They've simply decided not to. And so when this is the strategy of the Democratic Party, right? When this is the strategy of the faction of the capitalist class that claims that they have our interests at heart, and then women's organizations fall into line supporting them. I don't know who here gets like emails from Planned Parenthood, for example, but they're always fundraising for Democrats, telling everyone you have to go vote for the Democrats. That's how we're going to do it. Well, this strategy has been tried and it's failed. We don't even have to just say that due to our theoretical analysis as Marxists, we know that the Democrats or any other faction of the capitalist class will not advance this struggle. We can say from experience, from practice, from seeing what's happened in history already, not even particularly distant history. And what this really comes out of is the NGOization of our movements, right? There's a really crucial difference between the NGOs and a working class organization. And it's crucial for us to understand. So I've talked about this coalition, this unholy matrimony of the evangelical right and Wall Street. But it's also important to talk about the way that the Democrats, the other faction of the capitalist class, put together their coalition. And it is through these NGOs, it's through the nonprofits, where instead of having working class people come together to decide what our priorities are and to develop leadership and to advance our struggles in a way that is in our collective best interests, the billionaires of the Democrats fund NGOs where they can handpick people. They can handpick people to appoint as leaders of our movements. So this is, I just want to emphasize this because it's a really important difference. they're able to find people who look like us. You know, they're able to find women who can give a fiery speech about the need for abortion rights and put them in charge of an NGO where fundamentally their function is to channel working class outrage into supporting the Democratic Party, right? They're able to appoint Black mayors to preside over police forces that brutalize and murder Black and brown people. I mean, we see that in San Francisco, we see that in Washington, D.C., we see that in Chicago today. They're able to find queer and trans people to put in charge of NGOs that fundamentally misrepresent our interests. They're even able to some extent, co-opt the unions through this way. And this is something that has long been a tactic of the capitalist ruling class, but it's something that has really dramatically expanded in basically the period of neoliberalism, in the period of privatization, of union busting, and of replacing core functions of workers' organizations and of the state with these private nonprofit groups. And so this is something that is really crucial to understand, because we have to see why these NGOs that supposedly stand for women's liberation, that supposedly stand for abortion rights, are funneling support into the failed strategy of the Democratic Party. And that is an analysis that we need in order to formulate our own strategy to counteract that and to build a really successful movement that's actually fighting for these things that they actually claim that they're fighting for, but have done very little to actually do. We really need a socialist approach to speak to the life and death issues that all of the members of our class deal with every day. We need a socialist approach. That's the only thing that can stitch all of these different issues together and build a fighting coalition based on our class that can actually fight for these things and win. We don't need hundreds of single issue groups. We need a mass movement that is rooted in class organization, that is rooted in our class, that can unite all of these different struggles of our class together and fight against our common enemy, which is the capitalist class, that can fight against all of these different approaches that the capitalists take to divide us, to demobilize us, to distract us, to make us feel hopeless. That's fundamentally their worst nightmare, is for all of these struggles to unite. The thing that keeps Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk up at night in cold sweats is the idea that the labor movement, that the movement for women's liberation, that the movement for trans liberation, that the movement for the liberation of nationally oppressed peoples, that the movement against racist police brutality and white supremacy all come together and join in a common struggle, shoulder to shoulder, against the capitalist system, which is necessary for us to see our liberation in any of these struggles. And it is the one thing that can actually take these capitalists out of power and change the system to one that actually puts people first over the capitalist profits. We actually have the power to defeat them if we use it. And it's so crucial that we organize. The socialist answer, our answer to all of these attacks and to all of the distractions that the Democrats and their NGOs put in front of us, is for our class to be united and strong and to fight back on all of these fronts. And so I've talked about, the history of the struggle. I've talked about why abortion rights and reproductive justice and all of these other issues are the sort of wedge issues that they are under US capitalism. I've talked about how the Democratic Party is not capable of taking any sort of leadership in this struggle and why they have failed repeatedly to move the struggle forward. Now, I want to talk about how we're not just fighting against these attacks. We are fighting for something. And this is so crucial because there is no way that we can win if our only position is to defend the status quo against reactionary attacks. We have to advance the struggle forward. We have to put a vision of a new society, a different system, where the needs of the people, where the needs of women, where the needs of nationally oppressed peoples, where the needs of LGBTQ people, where the needs of every aspect of our class are put first, where on the basis of class organization, we get rid of the capitalist system that seeks to pit all of these different struggles against each other and unite them on the basis of using the resources of our society to resolve all of these contradictions, to solve all of these problems, and ultimately to dramatically improve the lives of the people. We're fighting for socialism. Women's liberation requires socialism. And that's what we're fighting for. Now, this is something that we can say, this is something that we can look to historical examples of, and this is something that we can look to the kernels of in our movement today to see what vision we need to be putting forward for the way that we can transform our society. And we're going to do all three. So first, I want to talk about the history. The Soviet Union, of course, in 1920 became the first country in the world to legalize abortion. This was 53 years before Roe v. Wade made abortion legal in the US. The Soviet Union also legally guaranteed 8 weeks of paid maternity leave in 1922. Sorry, yeah, 1922. Further still, they created a commission in 1925 to research and develop contraception for both women and men. While these studies unfortunately didn't produce extensive useful results. Simply the fact that this commission existed, the goals of this commission indicated a radical commitment to breaking down the uneven burden of reproductive responsibility that was placed on women. And that's something that we need to always have front and center in our struggles. We can, of course, contrast that to the US government, which in the same time period was busy stonewalling the demands among its citizenry for birth control. The US, does anyone know when the US legalized birth control? This was shocking to me when I learned it. It was not until 1965 for married couples. 1965! And it was not until 1972 that unmarried people were legally allowed to use birth control in the US. Okay, Cuba legalized abortion in 1965, very soon after the revolution took power. Today, abortions and STD testing, birth control are all readily available, and they are provided by the government of Cuba free of charge. This is really not just abortion, but reproductive rights for free, on demand, without apology. Teen sexual education is compulsory, so everyone understands fundamentally how reproduction works, how human reproduction works, which is a fundamental piece of actually having real reproductive justice in a society, is for people to basically just know how their bodies work. There is none of this abstinence only bullshit, excuse my language, that is substituted for real sex education in the US. People are actually taught about how pregnancy works, how contraception works, and how their bodies work. There's also the other side of this, which is, of course, reproductive justice doesn't just mean the right to choose not to have children, the right to choose not to become pregnant or to carry a pregnancy. It also means the right to choose to have children. And this is impossible This is impossible to truly be able to make that decision in a society where the basic necessities of life are not guaranteed. The impact of socialized childcare in socialist societies really cannot be overstated. In a capitalist society, you don't have to be a subsistence farmer in order to eat, right? We all take for granted the idea that if you have the money to buy it, you can just walk to a grocery store and you can buy food. Food production is taken care of socially, right? It's done for the profit of the capitalists instead of for human need, but it still is organized socially. You don't have to be a subsistence farmer in order to eat. Under socialism, you don't have to be a subsistence parent in order to have children. I think that a lot of people who don't know anything but the capitalist society that we grew up in have a hard time even wrapping their head around how important this is. When you have socialized childcare, when you have housing and food and education and healthcare provided as basic human rights to everyone in society, you can freely make the choice to become a parent, to have children, to have a family in a way that does not require you to be able to financially, have the resources to procure all of these things that you need and that your children will need uh, privately. You live in a society that organizes social reproduction to be socialized, where you can count on having the needs of the basic just needs of existence of yourself and of your children being met by society, because society is organized to actually meet them. And this is so huge because for many people in my generation, we don't only face the problem of not the threat of not having access to abortion if we need it, but it's also impossible to have an apartment that's large enough to have children in on a typical worker's wages. It's impossible to provide the food and the healthcare and the education that children need. And so many people in my generation who want to have children are unable to even make the choice to do that. And so there are two sides to the issue of reproductive justice, and both of them have to be met in order for us to really see what our liberation looks like. And so what that really means, what I think we really need to take away from this, is that in our society, in our capitalist society, we do not actually have the right to choose. Our right to choose is curtailed on all sides. It's curtailed by the fact that the capitalist system restricts our rights in many ways in order to attack and control the bodies of women and of other people in our class who need access to abortion, and who need all other types of healthcare. And it does this as a way to shore up a certain ruling coalition of the capitalist class. But also, our basic necessities are not being taken care of by this society. Our basic necessities are not met by the capitalist society that we live in. And so, not only are we being threatened with no longer having the right to choose to have an abortion, we have never, in a real sense, had the right to choose in this society in a fully informed and supported way to have children. We do not in this society have the right to organize our families the way that works for us. We do not in this society have the right to socialize, to socialize childcare and the basic social reproductive functions that keep our class existing from one day to the next, from one year to the next. And ultimately, what we have to fight for is a new system. We're not just protesting against the capitalist system, we are fighting to replace it with a socialist system, a system that puts the needs of workers and oppressed people first, that does that by making the vast majority of people who do the work that makes our society run, vesting them with the authority to actually make the decisions about running our society. And through doing that, we can build a system that meets the needs of the vast majority, that meets the needs of all of the specially oppressed groups of our class, and that most importantly, allows us to put the vast, unimaginable resources of our society to work for the needs of the many and not just the private profits of a tiny group of hyper exploitative billionaires. So that is ultimately what we are fighting for. That is why socialists need to be in the leadership of the struggle for reproductive justice. And I'm really looking forward to carrying on this conversation with you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rosa, and you've certainly given us a lot to think about and to talk about. But Alan, do you want to make some announcements about upcoming events? Or
Will do. Let me share my screen. Hang on a second. Oops. Okay, can you hear me now?
I
Yeah.
can.
Okay, next week we have a great presentation, More Than a Wall, a book by David Bacon, who's a well-known Bay Area labor photojournalist and journalist, will be speaking about his work on the US-Mexico border. I've looked at some of the photos that are part of the book, and it's really, this is one of them that we have up on our website. Very moving and poignant photos of what's going on, discussion of what's going on. So that's next Sunday at 10:30. Followed by the week after, we'll have John Parker, who will be speaking on his recent visit to Donbass in Ukraine. And John is one of the few activists who has been able to go to Eastern Ukraine, to the Donbass region, and report back from on the ground, interviewing people, talking about the struggle there. Very intense situation with thousands of people being killed and injured over the last 8 years, and certainly since the war began in Ukraine. So we have those two events coming up, and we're looking forward to having everybody come and participate. So good sessions. You can go to our website at ICSSmarks.org, sign up for our email list. You'll be notified of upcoming programs. And you can also send us a message if you need to contact us through our contact form on the page.
Okay, and thank you. And also on our webpage, I believe, is our fund appeal. Does Richard want to say something about that? Richard is here. He's not mute. He is muted, but now he's not.
Okay, thank you, Gene. Yeah, just a brief note. As we've mentioned, we'll be going back to the library, meeting physically in the library, and that will add some expenses to us. But we have continuing expenses, not major, but we need some. We need some funds, and I posted in a chat some information on how you can contribute. Number of easy ways. Plus, the same information is on your announcement email, and there is a donate section on our website, ICSSmarks.org. So please be generous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so now we will turn to comments, Q&A. And if you have a question or a comment, please so indicate. You can raise your hand someplace on the bottom of your screen, and I will keep a stack of that. Please try to limit your comments to 2 minutes, and we'll move forward, and we'll go until about 12:30. We'll pause a little bit before to let Rosa have the last word as usual. But I see Janet is on the stack, and I thought I saw Alan's thing there again. And again, we're looking forward to this discussion. Go ahead, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosa. So I have 2 things to bring up. One is basically, why do people want abortions? Other than some women having medical situations that would affect their health, it's because they just don't want to have a child or another child. The child would be unwanted. So I wanted to bring attention to another dimension of to the issue, and that is the link between legalized abortion and crime reduction. I'm going to post an article in the chat. It's titled "Economic Research Resurfaces Debate About the Link Between Legalized Abortion and Crime Reduction." Here are some excerpts. Violent crime rates in the US have fallen by nearly half since the early 1990s. A 2020 paper in the American Law and Economics Review, based on a working paper published in 2019 by Stanford University economist John Donahoe and University of Chicago economist Steve Levitt, finds that legalized abortion following the Supreme Court's landmark Roe v. Wade decision in 1973 accounts for a large share of the crime drop over the past 3 decades. Legalized abortion is estimated to have reduced violent crime by 47% and property crime by 33% over this period, and thus can explain most of the observed crime decline. So the paper was a replication of an earlier paper published in 2001. The article says, the thing that's most interesting about the research is we simply repeated the regression process we went through 20 years ago with more data, and the results got even stronger. So the reason is that unwanted children are at an elevated risk for less favorable life outcomes on multiple dimensions, including criminal involvement, and legalized abortion reduces the number of unwanted births that reduces the number of unwanted children. Duh. It takes a study to make this convincing. So that's one thing. After you comment on this, I'd like to also raise the issue about the influence of the Catholic Church in overturning Roe v. Wade. I've not read or heard about this in the current battle. We have Biden is Catholic, Pelosi is Catholic, 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic. So would you comment on that?
Okay, Rosa, you care to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Janet. I think, yeah, the connection between abortion and crime reduction is a really important point. And I mean, it goes into so many things, including just like the basic failure of our society to produce to provide an environment for raising children in a healthy way. And so much of the supposed crime that happens in our society is really crimes of desperation and poverty, and that comes due to personal circumstances, but also like you're saying, simply forcing people to be parents when they're not ready to, when they don't want to. And then at the same time forcing parents to be the sole providers of their children, creates the situation where people just don't have people grow up without the basic resources that they need, without their basic both physical and emotional and intellectual needs being met. And that's a huge problem under the capitalist system in general. And one of the things that we need to really be conscious about and direct about the fact that we can only truly address these through a socialist system. There are many reforms that we can make in capitalism that will help, but the real answer is ultimately a society where people's basic needs are guaranteed as rights. And so much of the money that we currently spend on using brute force military methods through the police to quote unquote fight crime would be so much better spent on just meeting the basic needs of people. And on the question of the Catholic Church, yeah, I think that's...
Before you go on, let me just bring up these mass shootings, and I think there's a lot of the shooters were unwanted children, but anyway, I'm just...
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know about that in particular, but yeah, it's really just a symptom of a society that is failing to meet the basic needs of its people, I think. And on the question of the Catholic Church, yeah, I think that's really important. And actually, historically, the Catholic Church was the main institution that was the Catholic Church was the main institution that was fighting against abortion rights. The Catholic Church was a major institution that was in favor of criminalizing abortion and also birth control. And I do think that it continues to play an important role in that today, but actually much of the new energy around this has actually come from the evangelical Protestant churches as well. So it's really a problem that can be described as a problem of the sort of virulent right-wing form of Christianity that is so dominant under capitalism, but really it's a problem of capitalism. I think it's important that we recognize that the fundamental reason for this sort of political marriage that has created this political environment in which the right wing, funded by finance capital, is attacking abortion rights and all of these other things, is because that is a defense mechanism of the finance capitalists to ensure that that they have a sort of political block that they can get to defend their rights to endlessly exploit and exclude and oppress our class as a whole. So yeah, thank you for those really important comments, Janet.
Okay, thank you. And next on my list is Alan and then Norma. Alan, you had your hand up at one point.
Okay. I just, first of all, thank you for a very informative and insightful presentation. I really learned a lot and appreciate the work that you put into preparing. It was very informative. I had a kind of a question about kind of the legislative part of this that I've been hearing about and you spoke to. I don't really understand this idea of, if a law is passed, doesn't the Supreme Court that protects abortion rights at the federal level, doesn't the Supreme Court has the ability to render that law unconstitutional? So then isn't the power in the hands of the Supreme Court ultimately? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, let me answer that real quick, and then actually maybe we can like take a few more questions, but I can give a really quick answer to that one real quick. So basically, it's a very good question, and yeah, you're correct that the Supreme Court has the ability to overrule any law that is passed. Fundamentally, the sort of like legal arguments that they're using for this, and this like veneer of sort of legality and respectability, and the sort of like smooth functioning and transition of the capitalist state is very important for the capitalist class in maintaining their rule. And so so the basic legal argument that that they're using is that because Congress has not passed a law to legalize abortion, that the Supreme Court can overthrow the previous decision that was also issued by the Supreme Court that would legalize it. And so in order to make the argument that a law legalizing abortion is unconstitutional and would be proactively thrown out, they would have to make a different argument, which is maybe a more difficult one for them to consolidate a majority around. They still could. And ultimately, these things are determined by the strength of the movement, not by the functionings of the capitalist state. But it's the basic like premise of the US system of government is that Congress has the right to pass laws, and so long as those laws don't violate some premise of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has to sort of abide by the legal system that is created by those laws, which in practice they do a lot of different things, but a legal in actual law establishing a right to abortion would be significantly more difficult for the right wing to overturn than the current situation where it rests only on a previous Supreme Court decision.
Okay, thank you. And then so next on the list is Norma, and then Richard has his hand up, Richard F. And so Norma.
Oh, hi, and thanks for the presentation, of course. We all very much appreciated it, naturally. Regarding putting out a new vision, actually, we need to affirm people's ideas of how to make a good world, how the good world works. People already think those kind of in back of their minds. We need to affirm those, to let the people bring those ideas forward, to say, right, how do we get there? These are ways to get there, expand their ideas instead of think that we are going to give them the visions of the good world. That's in line with that the people are very smart. School is necessary to deny that people are very smart, to take away people's powers to be geniuses. Everybody's a genius. I've begun reading articles saying so. I've been telling it to people that way for about 15 years. This idea of taking away our brilliance, our basis of who we are, in order to require that they buy diplomas and degrees, very, very bad. And so the respect for ourselves as well as for everybody else is necessary. In line with that, you mentioned something about getting together at Powell and Market when the decision is thrown at us. What actions is PSL planning to help us advance against the court's abortion prohibition? What action proposals have you heard, and what content, what arguments are going to be made into memes? Thank you.
Okay, do you want to deal with that now, Rosa, or do you take another question?
Let's take a few, and I can answer them all together, just so we can
Okay.
get into much.
Okay, Richard, you're up.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of comments. Yeah, and I was thinking in terms of demographic or population policies and the general situation. If there's a consensus that the world has an overpopulation problem. At the same time, it seems like the developed or certain kinds of countries are suffering a demographic crisis. That is there's not enough reproduction of individuals to maintain the population without transfers of populations that are extremely disruptive. I think you made the point that capitalism is not able to it's incapable of making a demographic policy, a rational one, or of executing one. And I think you gave the elements of a Marxist population policy, but it'd be great if, it would be great if PSL or some other Marxist organization actually put it together. In one. Somebody told me that there was a book published by Haymarket Press a few years ago on demography, but at any rate, just some ideas I thrown in. I have to leave incidentally, so I am not going to be able to stay, but I appreciate your comment.
There's no posting from you on the chat, Richard.
Right.
Okay, we don't have anybody else on the stack, so Rosa, do you want to go ahead and deal with that?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Yeah, Norma asked about what actions we're doing. Well, I think that branches of the Party for Socialism and Liberation will be leading actions in cities across the country on the day of or immediate day after the decision is released. And part of the reason for that is, people are watching this. People are aware of what's going on. People are aware of the importance of it, and there will be many thousands of people pouring into the streets across the country when this decision is released. And it's crucial. I can't overstate the importance that when this happens, that we actually get organized, that it not just be a one-day flash in the pan where people go into the streets and then go back home and start feeling hopeless again. It needs to be a sustained fighting movement where we are organizing on the basis of our class in order to beat back these reactionary attacks. And so as I said, Powell and Market, 5 p.m. the day that the decision is released, will be there, but that's just the beginning. Really, it's not even the beginning, it's the continuation, because the day after the decision was released, in the draft decision was leaked, we held a similar action and met many new people there who, for many of them, it was their first time ever coming out to a political action before. And many of those people are now, committed to organizing for to fight back against this, and in doing so in a sustained way, not just as coming out that one day and then going back home. So yeah, I think that organization is really the key, being organized and organizing along class lines, because it's going to be a long, prolonged fight for abortion rights, and we need to make sure that we're really in it for the long haul. So Richard was talking about the sort of demographics and the idea of overpopulation. I think it's important to say that there is maybe some consensus among bourgeois academics that there is an overpopulation problem, but really that's not precise. The problem is not that there are too many humans. The problem is overconsumption. The problem is that the resources, the vast resources of our world, are being used in the most exploitative and extractive and wasteful way by the capitalist ruling class. And we can sustain our population. We can grow our population. I think that we don't need to impose any sort of top-down restrictions on the way that people can choose to organize their families. What we need is a society that uses the resources of our world in a sustainable way, and where instead of this tiny clique of billionaires who are controlling almost every aspect of the way that the resources of our world are used, and taking joyrides to space in their little toy spaceships, and all of these just unbelievable excesses, that we use these resources in a sustainable way for human need. And I think that's the most important part. I agree with you that the capitalist system really is just incapable of solving this question. It's one that can only be done when the idea that private individuals and corporations can control the resources for their own ends, instead of having the people who do all of the work, the people who live on this planet collectively make the choices about it, be the ones who are making the decisions. So yeah, thank you for the comments and questions. I guess I see there's a couple more people, so I'll let Eugene manage the stack. But
Okay, well, moving forward, we have Sharon and then Nina have things to say. So go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you for framing all your remarks in terms of socialism being the ultimate only answer. And I think that's very, very important to continue, although, and that more and more of us have a voice, raise our voices in that way. Although a broad coalition against the Supreme Court decision will include those who don't agree on that, but still, to constantly, for us as Marxists, to constantly raise that is extremely important. You mentioned that pessimism. I mean, I am a person who struggles against pessimism and feelings of complete hopelessness all the time, politically speaking. And I think that it's very important to combat that in the movement. And it's not just, it is the liberal wing of the feminist movement that is kind of conceding this in advance, but it's not only them, it's a lot of us who just feel like we fought so hard and now it's going to be overturned. And I think the demand on Congress that you suggest has to be out there all the time, because the Supreme Court decision is based on the notion that there is no real right to privacy in the Constitution. So the constitutional argument is being used in a very narrow sense, but it applies to other decisions, like the rights of anybody to marry anyone, and other things that are based on this privacy concept. So the passage of laws may not ultimately be enough of a bulwark against the right wing, but there certainly is one thing that can be done in the fight back against this. And then, even though we all know that socialism is the only ultimate answer, there will be other efforts to engage people in the fight back, including the model that was so successfully raised by the Jane organization in Illinois, and that will have to be replicated. And the working class has a stake in making those underground things come to life and really flourish in so many places that they can't destroy them across the country. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks again, Rosa, for a very, very good presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And do you want to address that, Rosa, or deal with Nina's question?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. I can go ahead. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. That was really really good set of questions. So on the issue of sort of, people who don't necessarily agree with socialism are going to be part of the fight back. That's true. And that's so important. And the most important part of that, the most important aspect of that is that it's when people are in motion that their ideas can change. It's in the struggle that people can really change the way that they see the world around them and the way that they see their ability to change it. And so this is why, it's important that that we're not just part of this struggle, but that we are really the ones who are most militantly advancing it, because it is through this struggle that many of these people who have just never really thought about socialism before per se can learn about the power of collective organizing and can learn about the necessity for organizing our society on a different basis. And that's how new organizers are minted. That's how our movement has always worked. And I also appreciate you mentioning about the way that it can feel a little bit hopeless sometimes. And I think it's something that is really important in our organizing and in the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and also just my own personal sort of practice of organization, is that revolutionary optimism is not just thinking that we're going to win because we have to or whatever. It's really a discipline. It's really a discipline to see all of these right-wing attacks, to see all of the ways that the right wing is trying to push us back, to destroy all of the gains that we've made, to break up and divide and confuse our class and pit us against each other. To see all of that happening and still hold on to as a sort of core piece of truth that we know that our class has the power to overthrow all of this. Our class has the power to win. Our class has the power and the ability and the talent and the skills and the just fire inside to build a new society, one that really meets our needs. And so all of the little victories that we've won along the way are really just a reminder that it is possible for us to win. It's in all of these movements of our class that we can see these little glimpses of our power, and ultimately it's going to be through it's ultimately going to be through uniting our class to fight for a new system that we're going to be able to win it. And that's really what I hold on to personally. Yeah, on the you're right that Roe does so much more than just the right to abortion. And in fact, the leaked draft opinion talks about how they want to recriminalize homosexuality. They want, I mean, they didn't mention it directly, but the legal argument that they're making sets the precedent to overturn even the ban on anti-miscegenation laws. I mean, this is such a deeply reactionary opinion that was leaked and is likely to be, you know, in part or in full in the final actual decision. And they're telling us what they plan to do, and we need to be prepared to fight back. I mean, all of these protections that were basically rooted on Roe v. Wade need to be enshrined in law for sure. Yeah, and ultimately, you know, the only way that those are going to be really won for sure, as kind of a done deal, is when it's our class in power and the capitalists don't get to you know, whip up these sort of reactionary backlashes against all of the gains that we've made. So thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. And next is Nina, who needs to unmute herself. And no one is after Nina, but I will put myself on the stack after Nina. And then we'll close the stack because we're getting close to 12:30 and we want to leave a little time for a summary statement from Rosa. So,
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Rosa, I was a reporter writer for CARAL, CARAL, which is the California, I guess, version of NARAL or whatever, which was specifically abortion rights. And in looking at a movement or a group like that, what is it that isn't quite right? Do you see that as a sort of let's see, a nonprofit that's somehow standing in the way of revolutionary change or something like that?
you want to address that now?
Yeah. Okay, I can go ahead. Well, what I would say is that the problem with the NGOification of our movements is not that the NGOs as institutions are necessarily actively standing in the way or fighting against us. Sometimes they even do good things. The problem is the question of organization and leadership, because with these NGOs, it's not our class who decides who's running them, who's in charge of them. It's the capitalists that provide the funding. As soon as, you know, they're able to essentially handpick leaders for the NGOs based on who they think is going to toe their line, they can cut funding as soon as they start doing things that they don't want to be done. And as long as these groups are tied to the Democratic Party and to funding from the Democratic Party's sort of donor base, which is largely based in the capitalist class and to a sort of lesser extent to a certain strata of the petty bourgeoisie and well, you know, we don't have to get too into all of that, but the fundamental question is the one of leadership and class organization. Who is it that decides what the priorities of these organizations are? And in order for us to ultimately be victorious, it has to be our class that's deciding what our priorities are. The capitalists can't tell us what our priorities are. We're never going to be successful if we are organizing in that way. So yeah, it's not that these groups are necessarily actively hostile, standing in the way, or whatever, but it's important that we answer this question of class organization and leadership in our movement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks so much. And let me just ask a question or make a comment here, because I agree 100%. Socialism is the answer, and the working class has to build socialism. We need to look to the working class. But the other thing I've always said and repeatedly is that Marx never said workers of America unite or workers of Europe unite. He said workers of the world unite, workers and Lenin changes to workers and peasants and oppressed people unite. And I think this is important because we tend to think, okay, it's up to us, but also in terms of abortion rights, I know things are going on in Poland, I think Brazil, and throughout the world, this issue is being raised. And so we need to look to the international working class in uh, Latin America, Africa, Asia, but also we need to note that the largest working class in the world, and some would think, I think, the most effective is in China, which is well organized and effective. So maybe you can comment on that and go on into our your final statement, because we need to stop our recording soon, although we will continue to discuss things afterwards, and you're more than welcome to stay for that unrecorded session. So it's all yours, Rosa.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gene. Well, I think that's a really important point. I think that that is really crucial. That you know, the manifesto says workers of all countries unite. Or as you know, you mentioned, Lenin, expand is that to workers and oppressed people of the world unite. And internationalism has to be a really important part of all of the work that we do, and that is not just about the work that we do in defending abortion rights, but across you know, all of the issues that we fight on, all of the issues that affect our class. And it is true that it is true that, you know, both the socialist countries and the workers' movements in some of the other capitalist countries provide really important examples and really important really resources that we can draw on in our own organizing work. And that is in the form of models of how we can organize and fight back, and also in examples of what we can achieve, and what has been achieved in China, in the Soviet Union, in Cuba, despite the most adverse of conditions, with the boot of US imperialism on their necks for the entire course of their development, is really a statement about how powerful socialism, the rule of the working class over society, is in developing the conditions for people to just basically thrive and have their basic needs met. And so, yeah, I think that that's something that has to be part of every aspect of our work. And we also have to be aware of the sort of reverse of that, which is the way that US imperialism will use the sort of straw man of women's rights or other issues to advance its own interests. I mean, the invasion, the brutal 2-decade-long occupation of Afghanistan was predicated in part on the idea that the US empire was there to destroy their country in service of women who were supposedly being oppressed in Afghanistan. And it is true that the situation of women in Afghanistan was horrible before the US invasion. And the only thing that could make that situation worse was the systematic bombing and destruction of the entire country, the occupation for 20 years. And now, of course, after all of that, the same Taliban is back in power. And so we need to look to these other socialist countries, these other socialist movements around the world for inspiration. And we also have to be able to apply that anti-imperialist analysis to the way that we think about all of the struggles that we're engaged in here at the same time, so that we're not drawn into these reactionary these reactionary campaigns of using the sort of specter or the like zombie reanimated corpse of some sort of movement for liberation in the US in order to support the machinations of the empire. So yeah, thank you for that really important point, Gene.
But
Oh, and I see that Mimi just wrote in the chat, in China, expecting mothers have a 98-day paid maternity leave. In the DPRK, new mothers receive 240 days of paid maternity leave before and after giving birth. In Cuba, mothers can take up to 18 weeks of maternity leave, after which they can share parental leave with the father for up to 58 weeks. And they're going to give paid family leave to grandparents as well with the new families code. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mimi. Those are all really important examples of sort of what we can win. And so just to wrap up, I think I've said it a couple of times, and I'm going to say it again in my conclusion because it's really important. The struggle for women's liberation, the struggle for reproductive justice, the struggle for the liberation of LGBTQ people, the struggle for the liberation of all of the nationally oppressed minorities within the US. These struggles are all connected because they are all against a common enemy, which is the capitalist class. And the only way that we can bring all of these struggles together and ultimately end the system that is the root of all of these different forms of special oppression is using a socialist model of organizing, using a class-based model of organizing. It's by uniting and fighting as a class on behalf of ourselves, a class that fights for our own interests, that we can solve all of these problems and that we can build a new society. Because I'm going to say it again, what we're trying to do here is not protest against the system. It's not just to protest against these reactionary attacks. What we are fundamentally here to do is to change the system, to remove the capitalist class from power, from their dictatorship over all of the resources and all of our labor, and to put our own class, the working class, the class that actually makes society run, in power to make the decisions about how our labor and how our resources will be allocated. And it is through that, it is through socialism, through putting our class in power, that we're going to be able to ultimately solve the problems of all of these types of oppression that we face, that we're going to be able to build real reproductive justice where people are able to organize their families however works for them, where they're able to make a choice in a real way, not a fake way, about whether they will have children, about how many children they will have, and where ultimately all of the resources of society will be dedicated to meeting the needs of the people instead of the profits, the obscene profits of a tiny group of billionaires. So thank you so much for having me on today.
okay, well, thank you so much. And again, this is recorded and we'll probably get it up on our website soon. Raj, do you want to end the session?
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.